Hi everyone and welcome back to WARNO. Today we're going to do our 7th Panzer Division build. I'll try and keep this a little bit shorter than yesterday. With this deck you don't have a lot of choice in terms of your supply again. Immediately I'd just grab the 2 trucks. They are the best value for money by far, and they should keep you satisfied for an entire game as long as you use them sensibly, bearing in mind that this deck has plenty of suicidal spam units, so you're not going to have to rely on them all surviving. Then in terms of your command vehicle, I'd avoid the 160.1, take one of these 2. It's up to you which you take. You'd either have the 2 extra armor. I'd personally take the SPW 40P2 because it is faster, and I want it to get into position as fast as possible usually. And also then I can run it away as fast as possible. So that's really simple logistics. Infantry, your choices are a bit more limited in this deck. Ignore the UAZ completely. The Panzer Jaeger, definitely get these. They're perfectly fine at veteran in my opinion. Yes, you can put them to elite and increase their accuracy to 75% on the RPGs, but they get 2 RPGs, they're going to be close range units. I would just majorly stick with them being veteran. Bear in mind that this is a 530 meter range on those RPGs. They are up close and personal. They're going to be in forests, they're going to be in towns taking out vehicles. In terms of the vehicle you bring them in with, I would go with the SPW 70 here because you want to get them to the front lines as quickly as possible. Yes, of course you have the choice of the BMP 1s if you're planning to maybe drop them off, let them run in, and then pull that BMP 1 back. But for me, speed is of the essence, and it makes them just 60 points in total, 9 of them straight in the deck. Options in terms of your commander, it's completely up to you here. They are both strength 4. It's mainly looking at the launcher for me. The RPG 7 VL is better than the one that the Motsuchin have, so I would just go with that personally. And again, you want something fast, and I would just go with the UAZ. I don't think there's any need to bring them in anything else. Your Pioneers, I wish the flamethrowers were better. They're not, so I'm going to completely ignore them. I'm going to take the normal Pioneers because I want that satchel charge. It's proven to be very effective. How you bring them in is up to you. I'd probably just bring them in this little truck. I don't think there's any need to bring them in anything armoured. And again, I'd just go with veteran. Have 9 of them available to you. Pioneer Flam, I wish they were better. I'm hoping that they get adjusted and fixed, because they just don't work right at the moment in my opinion. So I'm going to ignore them and move on. The Motsuchin BTR, there are 8 of them instead of 7 compared to the normal Motsuchin. Again, it's up to you whether you bother to bring these in. I would, purely for the fact that, you know, you get 6 at veteran, they have 1 extra strength compared to the standard Motsuchin. In terms of what you can bring them in with, you could keep it really cheap and just bring them in the W50, or you can bring them in the SPW 70. It's completely up to you. I would just go with the transport truck because you don't necessarily need them right at the front lines. Then I'd put at least 1 stack of Motsuchin in there. I would bring them in the BMP-1 SP2, so you have access to this missile. You get 9 at veteran, making them quite spammable. I would actually bring these in as elite because it boosts the missile on that BMP-1 to 67% accuracy, and 67% is pretty good in my book. And I'd be using these basically as a missile boat to take out enemy tanks. So I would stick that in there. It's up to you if you then fill another 3 activation points. I personally would, and I would do exactly the same again. I would take another stack of those, giving me 12 in total with the BMP 1 SP2. Moving on to artillery. Choices, again, limited. You have your spammy unit here, which is basically a grad launcher with an extra reload. Completely up to you if you want to take that. I'm not a big fan. I would just take 2 sets of these. They have 3 per stack. That's enough to provide me with counter battery artillery and general harassment, as well as smoke when necessary. Moving on to the tanks. Now the tanks, you have a big choice here, but a lot of it is cheap spammy stuff. The first thing I'm going to say is grab yourself this command tank. It has got me out of at least 1 sticky situation so far. You only get 1 of them regardless of whether you bring it in as elite or not. It's completely up to you. You might as well bring it in elite for the fact that you only get 1 of them anyway. In terms of the other T70s down here, you only get one card of each. I'd honestly bring them in and I'd bump them up to veteran. That's my personal opinion anyway. That gives you 4 of each. They're pretty decent tanks. They have a good cannon on them. Now, if we just pin that, we also get access to the 10-point one, and if we just compare the two, so the 185 point has more armor, as does the 160 point, and in terms of the cannon, they're pretty much the same, these two, but the 110.1 has a much shorter range. You will notice it loses about 175. So my opinion would be they're still worth bringing in. I'd still bring them in as veteran, and you get 6 of them, and that's all your T70s in now. Job done. I'd also bring the Conkers because they are the price that I would like to see the other missile vehicles being. Or there's a middle point where this is slightly more expensive and the other ones are slightly cheaper, but 80 points is worth spending on these to have some extra missile units. You get 9 of them if you bring them in as veteran. Bring them in as elite, you still get 6, and it boosts their accuracy again to 67%. Grab those, well worth it. I'd also grab the T55 AM2Bs because they have that nice missile. You will notice that I quite like missile units. They are very effective in WARNO. They were pretty good in Wargame, but sometimes I feel like they're a little bit more powerful in WARNO just because perhaps of how people are playing it right now. It's up to you whether you bring it in as standard or elite. You still get 4 if you bring them in as elite. It depends if you're going to keep them near a command tank or a commander of some description to give them that extra boost, but it only boosts their accuracy to 60 from the veteran, which is already 50%. So I just bring them in as veteran. It gives you 6 of them. The missile's got a really good range at 2,800. You have another command tank, which is very cheap at the moment, which will be getting fixed. Bear that in mind. It is currently 70 points. It will be going up to 170, but I'd stick that in because it's nice and cheap, and it's always good to have an extra tank that can be used as a commander. The T55 AM2, this one is completely personal choice whether you bring that in. It's not a bad unit. It's pretty cheap. It's got 14 armor piercing. It's got 10 front armor. It's quite spammable. You could increase it to elite to give it 75% accuracy. I think 6 of them at veterans pretty good, so I'd stick that in. And then I'd grab the stack of the T55As. Now again, elite you would get 8, you get 12 at veteran. Elite just bumps this up to 45% accuracy, but honestly, I would be using these tanks up close and personal for infantry fire support and hiding them in tree lines until the enemy get far too close and then popping them out to do some damage. They are really weak. They are not going to take any amount of shots from the enemy tanks. So I just say cheap, cheerful, spammy unit, get them in there. Recon, you have a little bit better choice than you do with the 5th Panzer Division because you get an exceptional optics unit, so I would stick that straight in. There's no reason in my mind to bring it in at anything other than its lowest one, which is veteran, so grab that. You could bring in another stack of those if you so wished. Personally, I think 6 of those is probably enough. You want really now infantry that are going to get closer. Your choices are the Aufklärer, which are your standard ones, which can come in a UAZ. They are 4-member squads. Then you have the Aufklärer Heavy, which are 7 strength squads. If you notice, if I pin them, in terms of what they have, the simple difference here is that there are more of them and thus they have more rifles basically. Otherwise they're pretty similar. They both have very good optics, so this one's up to you. You're paying 5 points more for a lot of extra strength or survivability in my opinion. So personally, although you only get half of them, I'd grab these guys. You also get more of a choice in terms of what you can bring them in. I mean, a little truck would be fine. It depends if you maybe want to use them to bolster your defensive lines by dropping them off and then pulling back with a BMP-1. You could also get them behind enemy lines with an MI-8, and the MI-8 has its rocket pods obviously. Before I add them, I'll just jump quickly to the Spezial Aufklärer. These guys, very similar again, better strength, very good optics, exceptional stealth, 9 of them, so well worth it in my opinion because again you've got better survivability, They're good at getting up close and personal, and they have 2 RPKs. And as we know at the moment, RPKs are very good. Any machine gun is very good. And the more you have, the better your infantry squad is. So I definitely grab those guys. These are actually probably the guys that I kind of would want behind enemy lines if I could get them there. Now the risk is you make them very expensive by bringing them in an MI8, but the MI8 is obviously very useful. It will do a lot of damage to enemy infantry, so I'd bring them in that. It provides you a little bit of rocket harassment from those choppers. Now in terms of the other 2, I'd probably grab these guys just again for their survivability. I think bring them in a truck is absolutely fine, keeps them nice and cheap. Whether you want to spend an extra 3 points is up to you. We've got 12, 16 there. I'd be tempted to bring something else in, but let's move on, we might come back to that. Anti-air, your choices aren't terrible and aren't great. You have the Strela here, which doesn't have the best accuracy. You could bump that up to elite to increase its accuracy a bit to 45%. It's not great, but in some ways in this deck I kind of feel like something is better than nothing, but we'll come back to them. Down here you've got the Strela. You can bring in 2 sets of those. Their accuracy is 62%. That's not bad. Just get both of those in because you want something that doesn't have radar on it in this game now, because everyone has seed and everyone is using seed. Then you have the choice of the Cub, which has a lovely long range, but its accuracy is pretty poor. If you upgrade it to Veteran, you only get 1 of them, and it only increases the accuracy to 50%. It's quite disappointing in all honesty. The fact you only get 2 of them isn't great either. This one just doesn't do it for me at the moment, so I'd actually grab yourself a Shilka, grab a stack of those. You could bring them in as elite if you wanted, but I just bring in 4 as veteran. And then, again, that gives you 16. Do you bring in something just to scare off the enemy with the Strelas? I'd probably say yes. I might regret it, but I'll stick them in the deck. I bring them in as elite. You still get 8 of them. It just increases their accuracy a bit. They're not great, but they're better than nothing. Yes, I wish there were Iglas there. Helicopters, you get some decent helicopters in this deck. Now, it's completely up to you if you bring them. These 2 are the same price, but the second one has a better anti-tank missile. I would actually stick that in there. But again, it's up to you if you want to play with choppers. Then you have the option of some more choppers for rocket pods. You get these ones, which have 64 across the board, or this one, which has 32 across the board. Obviously, this means resupplying more, this means resupplying less. If you bring them in as veteran, it doesn't do you any good, because then you only get to bring 1 in. I'd honestly select this one, because it's going to do more damage before it's destroyed, potentially, and before it needs rearming. But just bear in mind that they are expensive. They are not cheap at all. The other option, of course, would be to bring in 2 cards of this, because you only get 1 per card. But that's a personal choice. But I like something that can spam rockets. Moving on to aircraft. So this is the aircraft spam deck at the moment. Basically, all people do with this deck is spam bomber after bomber after bomber. In a game we played yesterday, we killed 22 aircraft, most of them being bombers from this deck. So just bear that in mind. If you're playing against this deck, expect a lot of bombers to come at you. So they get a lot of availability, and some of them are very good. Like this one here, this has an anti-ground missile with 30 penetration. You actually get 2 options here. You also get this one, but its range is slightly less. It's only 3,357 versus 3,500. So you're better off taking this one, in my opinion. You could bring it in as veteran and increase its accuracy to 62, or elite and 75. But honestly, it's going to fire 2 missiles as it comes in probably. So you might as well take the 50% and take that risk. You just have to play carefully with it. Because look, I've now got 4 of these. Then you have the cluster bomber, which you can have 4 of, so we can add that as well. Again, there's actually no reason not to bring it in other than just trained. Then you've got a HE bomber and another HE bomber here. This one has 6 bombs. This one has 4 bombs. Which one am I going to take? Well, it doesn't really matter. You could probably take both. all that you're going to do with these is bomb the enemy. So I'll stick that in, and I'll stick one of those in. You do have some AA planes, but honestly, is there a point? Probably not. You could take some more bombers if you want. The napalm bombers, they're a bit hit and miss. They do damage to buildings, but they don't always kill the infantry inside. They're not terrible units, but I've seen people utilize these to bomb roads and things, and vehicles generally just drive through them without being too phased, unless it's an unarmored vehicle or something like a supply truck, in which case it will probably blow up. So there are reasons to take it. It's kind of up to you. I'd certainly grab this thing, which is the Su-22M4P, your anti-radar jet, and again, you can rank it up. But as we saw in our testing, ranking it up to veteran didn't make a huge amount of difference in terms of how often the missiles hit. Okay, so we didn't test it 100 times, but in a brief testing on, I think in total 7 units, there just wasn't a huge difference. So I just grabbed those as trained. They should be sufficient. And then you've still got room for a little bit more to be added here, but if we click back through the deck, we've got a lot of space for 3 points. We've got a 2-pointer there, we've got 3 points there, we've got 3 points there. So where you spend your points now are completely up to you. Obviously a lot of people are just spamming aircraft with these decks, so you could just bring in some more bombers if you wanted. You could back up a bit, drop one of the helicopters, and maybe take something else as well. So let's say we take an extra set of bombers, since that's what we're doing with this deck at the moment, it seems, until they reduce the numbers. Go back to the helos. Let's get rid of those rockets. Keep that chopper, and it means we still get 3 points to spend somewhere else. Whether you bring in some more cheap tanks is up to you. I'd probably... difficult. I'd probably be tempted to bring in some more Recon, to be honest, because you can lose Recon fast. I'm going to stick a squad of these guys in. So I have one of each of the infantry now. These guys, reasonably cheap. 12 squads of them, just to throw up at the front line. If they die, they die. It's not the end of the world. So that's the deck. Let's have a quick recap. So logistics, we have 2 sets of the trucks because they're the best value, and we have the SPW as the command vehicle. Up to you which one you bring, but I'd recommend one of the 100-point ones. Infantry, we have the Panzerjäger because they have 2 launchers, which are really good. We have the Pioneer Fur, it's my preference because it has a better launcher. We have the Pioneers because right now for me satchel charges are better than the Pioneer Flamethrower. Then we have the Motsuchin BTR because they have slightly more strength because they have an additional squad member or 2. And then we have 2 stacks of the standard Motsuchin coming in the BMP-1 SP2 for the missile availability in that BMP-1. Moving on, we have artillery choices, which are pretty limited, so I've just gone with the 2 biggest cannon ones they have for counter battery more than anything else. You could always go for the spam grads if you want, but I just don't think they're that effective. Tanks wise, we've pretty much got a bit of everything here. We have all of the T-72s straight away at the top there. We have a card of all of them brought in at veteran or elite in the case of the commander, because it doesn't matter with the commander, you only get one either way. But these guys can be pushed up to elite by being near a commander. Then you've got the option of the Conquerors. It's up to you whether you bring one. I think they're really cheap at the moment. They're probably going to get rebalanced and the price increased, or the alternatives for the other divisions will be reduced in price. Watch this space. T-55AM2B because it's got a missile on it and it's a really long range missile. Then the T-55AM2 Fur because it's really underpriced at the moment and it will be getting fixed in a balance patch, I'm sure, this week. Then the T-55AM2 because why not? And again the T-55A because again it's just a spammable tank that you get plenty of. This deck relies on cheap spammable tanks. They're really good at pushing up the lines with the infantry with support from artillery or bombers at the moment. This deck has too many aeroplanes, I'm convinced of that. Playing against it and playing as it, it's just a constant stream of bombers. That needs altering. Because it's a Panzer deck, a Panzer division, not an airborne division. They just shouldn't have access to that much. I mean, look, I have 22 aircraft in this deck. It's crazy. And then we have in our Recon the BRM-1 because it has exceptional optics, which is well worth it in my opinion. Just remember to turn off its weapons. And then we've got one of each of the infantry. I have one of them coming in an NMI-AT for an option to get behind enemy lines or to use just as a rocket pod barge. Then we have the AA options. Again, you're a little bit limited in this deck. I like the Strela because it can't be targeted by seed planes and I can just leave it and ignore it for a while. The Shilka does need to be babysat and have its weapons turned on and off, but again, pretty effective unit. I quite like them and I tend to sit them behind the Strelas, and if a plane gets too close I will flick them on and off. And then I've just got the Strela infantry brought in as elite because I just really like having some man pads in my deck, even if they do miss a lot in the case of these guys. Then in terms of helos, it's completely up to you whether you bring more helos or more aircraft. I've brought more aircraft. I have brought one helo. It's a personal preference. I just like the Mi-24P because it's got a good long-range missile, and if you're in a bind with enemy tanks, big ones that you are struggling with your weaker tanks, then it's an option to bring that in if the enemy don't have forward air defenses. Then in terms of air, we just have everything. We've got anti-tank jets, 4 of them. We've got 4 clusters. We've got 2 HE bombers there because they have 6 bombs. Then we've got 4 of these bombers which only have 4 bombs, and then we've got this one which is your seed plane, and then we have some more of these which is another set of 4 bombs, HE bombs specifically. This deck has too many bombers. You could opt to bring in some napalm instead of the HE bombs. The napalm bomber is good in the sense that when it drops its bombs, it will burn things where the napalm has landed, though certainly not as effectively, I should say, as Wargame Red Dragon. So it's up to you. I've seen it be slightly effective against unarmored vehicles, but also not effective at all against vehicles with a little bit of armor or that have driven straight through the other side of it. So it's up to you how effective you feel they are. But that's the deck. Thanks again for watching. I've tried to make this one a little bit faster than yesterday, as I did talk a lot about the units yesterday. I'd probably point you back to the overview video for this patch to see the units in a little bit more detail, because I do discuss them a little bit there. But I've tried to keep the important points in the discussion here. Thanks for watching again, guys. I hope this was helpful. Please, as always, like, share and subscribe, and I'll see you all soon for some more WARNO.